Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Chase Thomas Podcast, where I'm still the aforementioned Chase Thomas, coming to you live from Knoxville, Tennessee. My guest today, old friend of this very program, Hail Varsity, Brandon Vogel is here, jet lagged, feeling good. All the books you could ever imagine right behind him on youtube.com/Chase Thomas Podcast. So you can check those out. A great setup, 10 out of 10 room rater on this very program. Brandon, good afternoon, sir. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks a lot for having me back on. I had a ton of fun the last time we did this. And since then, a new college football season has technically begun, though nothing has changed for Nebraska, I think is what we learned in week 0.
Well, we're going to dive into that because, I mean, there are so many different layers to get into on this. And I feel bad for my Nebraska brethren like yourself. And I think everybody, it's interesting going into the new season, and I have a confession to make. On the podcast last week on our CFB full ride show with Matt, I predicted Northwestern to win this football game. Like, it was just one of those, and I was like, I want to be wrong. There are some games when you pick and you're like, I really want to be wrong here, and I couldn't shake this feeling where everyone went into it of like, Scott Frost, like, this is, everything's turning. Mark Whipple's in the building. Casey Thompson's in there. No Adrian Martinez. This Northwestern offense sucks. Like, no matter what, they should be okay. And then I was like, that's terrifying to me. Is everyone's just like moved on and just said they're going to win this to 11.5 or whatever it was, point spread. And I couldn't shake this feeling that I was like, this feels like the letdown of all letdowns to start this year. And I mean, as someone who watched the Illinois opener last year, and just, I feel like we've been here before where it's like, oh, Bielema starting off out of the gate. This is a new thing. Like, Nebraska should win handedly. They should just blow them out. Like, this didn't go that way. This past week did not go that way, Brandon. I hate that I was wrong here, and I think it stems from like just deep diving coaches in today's game, where after 2 to 3 years, I mean, you even go through the Nebraska history, Mike Riley, what he did in year 2, what Bo Pelini did in year 2, what Frank Solich did and you go up and down the list, and it's not even just Nebraska. You go across a lot of just college football programs. Nowadays, if the coach is going to stick, he's figured it out by year 2 or year 3. He's gone to at least a bowl game in year 2 or year 3. And we've given Scott Frost so long that I just feel like he can figure it out somewhere else, but I don't think he's going to figure it out here. And if I believe that, then I have to pick Northwestern to continue this pain and sadness in Lincoln, because there's just something off about it. And we all don't want to admit it because he's this legend in Lincoln. Is that a fair characterization of where they're at right now?
Yeah, I think so. You look at that game last week individually, and I would put it, I think this is what you were saying. What you were saying made me think of this. Nebraska was the team that was easy to overestimate going into that one. It had all the new offensive coordinator, one of the top transfer classes in the country, Northwestern, while we know that Northwestern has like this classic bounce syndrome where they go from 3-9 to 10-2, and have done that basically the last 4 years, still they were getting no credit in the preseason. And I didn't have them finishing above last in the Big Ten West either. So I did that myself. But they've got a great coach. They've got a great coach that doesn't take shortcuts, and is just has a team that's going to be ready to play. All of that stuff sort of points to Northwestern. And Nebraska's athletic director, Trev Alberts, he said this when they announced the decision to bring Frost back. He said it a couple of times since then. I mean, he's really upfront. He's like, there's not a lot of evidence that this approach is going to work. And there's not, because in today's college football in particular, you're right. You basically get 3 years. And if there's not proof of concept at that point, there's too much money at stake for teams to kind of wait it out. And whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing long term, who knows, because it's still a fairly recent development. But that's where we're at. Nebraska really needed a strong start to the year. There were moments during that game where it looked like they were going to get it. But but then the curse of close games cropped up again, and it's kind of a curse of their own making.
Well, I have not watched every Nebraska game during the Scott Frost era. I imagine you have, Brandon. So
Yeah.
when you go through, for someone who is a novice listening to this, who's like, yeah, I watch Nebraska, like the big games, then the Northwestern game, I watch the big ones, I'll watch Oklahoma. But they don't know. They just see the stat that Scott Frost is just horrific in one-score games. How would you explain to them what actually is true there? How much of it really should fall on Scott Frost? Is it unbelievable luck? Is it something that he does in his play calling when he gets up and he has to make, like, is it something that's controllable from Scott Frost's perspective? And like, is it something that they can overcome? Like, what is the real, like what's the real part of all of this narrative?
Yeah, tough question to answer, and one I have spent most of the past 4 years thinking about.
Hmm.
I am a kind of statistics probability minded person.
Hmm.
So when Nebraska, even before last year, when they lost all 9 games by single digits, um, kind of looked at this and be like, well, that flips. Like eventually
Hmm.
that flips. Just probabilistically, you get some of those back eventually. Um, so it's been difficult weighing like what is just randomness, what is bad luck, what is inherent to their approach. What was interesting about the Northwestern game, so I think to describe a lot of those close losses, you got to look at turnovers.
Hmm.
Nebraska it's had a positive turnover margin at the end of the year once since
Hmm.
joining the Big Ten, one time, and during the Frost era, the best they've done so far is even. So that's a piece of it. And how
Hmm.
do you control turnovers? Great question. Every coach in the history of football is saying, "Well, we're working on ball security and we're working on getting the ball out." Um, but on against Northwestern a week ago, that game flipped in my mind with the onside kick call. Nebraska had built an 11-point lead, lost it, kind of navigated a tricky stretch, I thought, around halftime to only build that lead back to 11. And that's the moment it chose to deploy that onside kick, which,
Hmm.
it was a show of aggression against an opponent in Northwestern. And they're very similar in my mind to Wisconsin, Iowa, and probably Minnesota in that they're a team that they're built on making you earn it. And this felt like trying to take a shortcut to me. Obviously, there were a lot of plays after that that could have affected the outcome of that game. But that was the play that was kind of symbolic of, I think, all of this era to this point of nothing seems to have changed. Like, it's hard to believe for me that Nebraska doesn't display a little bit more humility in that moment of like,
Hmm.
hey, the super aggressive play here, the like, we're going to go out and win it play is a low percentage onside kick versus you kick it deep, you give yourself a ton of room, 75 yards probably, to work with and make Northwestern run some clock. So that was a piece of it that sticks out in my mind of like, that might just be baked in with Frost. Like his approach is aggression all the time. And they're in a league, particularly a division, that makes that really tough.
When that happened, though, did you like? What was your first thought? Like, you're in the building for like, what was the immediate reaction from everyone around you, and just what like that just feels like one of those moments. I can only imagine being in Neyland for something like that this fall with Heupel, and that offense against just I don't know, in maybe like Florida in 4 weeks, and you're like, oh, what are you doing? Where you're like trying to, that same kind of vibe where everybody's already tense because they want to get through this, and there's like so much pressure on just getting over the hump and starting off hot and being like, all right, we're moving in the right direction and things are good. Like you just want to like feel okay, comfortably. Like you don't want to feel tense the whole time. And you're up 2 scores and you're like, all right, maybe I can just start feeling okay. Like we're in the second half, like we're fine. And then you just tense back up. And I can just only imagine as a Nebraska fan, like the overwhelming sensation. Did you feel that? And were people around you just all dumbfounded? Or were there some like, oh, hey, what are you going to do? He was going for the jugular, right?
Yeah, well, the sports writer who's sitting next to me, who is a Nebraska media member
Hmm.
known for a long time, we looked at each other and just kind of shared a look. Nothing needed to be said. It was like,
Hmm.
oh my gosh. My first thought when that onside kick call happened was like, Trev Alberts is somewhere in this stadium, and I would pay like $1 million to know what his reaction was. My second thought was to look down to the sideline. Northwestern was on the edge or on the end that was directly below the press box. Open air press box at Aviva Stadium, by the way, which was kind of nice. Okay. I looked down at the Northwestern sideline. Northwestern wasn't, Pat Fitzgerald wasn't too demonstrative in his reaction, but Northwestern's offensive line definitely was. They were, it was like okay, here's our moment. I can't believe they just gave us this. I would have loved to have been on a Northwestern headset at that point to hear how the box reacted. And I mean, the book is out, I think, on Nebraska. In the Big Ten, you read, the Athlon preview, the anonymous coach comments, which I love every year. It's basically that. It's like, just wait against Nebraska, and they'll do something akin to this. And they did. And Northwestern, from what I saw, was elated, which is what I assumed they would be.
What was the experience like for you though? Like going to a college football game in Dublin, like there's just so much, and like I'm a big proponent of home and home. Let's just do this at home. Like, what are we doing? Why are we sending these college kids to Dublin, Ireland? Like, I get like, what are we doing here? But then on the other side, you're like, well, that's a once in a lifetime kind of thing for the folks that can afford to take off time and to go overseas, or for the media members who might not have a reason to go to Ireland anytime soon. Like, that's a really cool experience. Like, what was it like for you to go over to Dublin and cover a college football game in Dublin? And how many people were like, so this is not the NFL, this is a college? Because like everywhere else in the world doesn't do this. This is a uniquely American thing with college sports and just how big it is. They're like, wait, what? This is all you people are here for a college game? Like your university? Was that kind of your experience, or what was it like for you?
Yeah, Ireland was a really great experience, and great in a way that I didn't fully expect. I had been to Ireland once before. So I knew, in terms of like an international destination, in 1992, Nebraska played in Tokyo, and imagining the fans and the players and the coaches and the staff going over there, and just like the cultural kind of crossroads that would be, like, I can't even fathom it. Ireland's a lot easier there. You go there. There's no language barrier. Dublin's a small, manageable city, but a great city. And Nebraska had between probably 10 to 12,000 fans go to that game. So Friday they had a team pep rallies for both Northwestern and Nebraska in a park in downtown Dublin. I honestly, as like a jaded media member, wasn't that excited about going. I was like, all right, well, we'll go do this and see what happens. It was great. Like, all of the things that I love about college football, the marching bands, the fans, all of that stuff. Like, we're used to that on a fall Saturday in Lincoln or Knoxville or wherever we find ourselves. Seeing it in that context, like, only elevated it for me. So up until the result, I think most Nebraska fans would give the trip, pretty high marks. And I thought it was a great experience to be able to do it. The stadium is cool. It comes with its quirks. The beer was free at the stadium for a while. I didn't get to enjoy that, but a lot of fans apparently did. So
the beer was free.
Well,
how does that work?
Well, it does. It's not designed to work that way. The stadium had a Wi-Fi problem. There was a moment in the first half of this game where I just closed my computer. And I was like, just writing in my notebook, which is kind of fine for me. I tend to have a pretty old school approach on game days anyway.
Same here.
But it also, the Wi-Fi for the stadium was down. And during COVID, Ireland, like a lot of European countries, as I've been told, like, really went to contactless payment. So they weren't set up to take cash. And rather than say, well, all concessions are shut down, they said everything is free, which I feel terrible. You think about the stadium and the organizers of the event, like the amount of lost revenue there. I mean, we heard stories of both Nebraska and Northwestern fans being like, I know you can't take this, but like, here, take some cash, please, because this is crazy. So yeah. It was.
Can you imagine doing that at like Neyland or something? The amount of college kid, like, there's just you think you saw some mustard bottles and some golf balls last year hit the field. Just a second half of free alcohol. Oh my goodness! Woo!
Yeah, and to your point about the NFL thing, that was a
Mm,
good one. It was interesting. So one of the outlets that was credentialed for this game was like the Irish NFL show, which is
mm,
cool. Like they're there, they cover the NFL in a you know remote location, and they came here because it was just football. It was the closest thing they would have until the NFL returns there.
mm,
And at the game itself, you saw a lot of fans, and I assume these were mostly the Irish contingent. Just like there were so many random NFL jerseys. It was just like, well, this is the
mm-hmm.
American football jersey I have, saying I'm going to a football game, so it's what I'll wear. So I do think there's definitely Europe, specifically kind of the UK, Ireland. I think has gotten a little bit used to the NFL at
Mm.
this point. College football's still a little bit of an outlier or a novelty, I guess is probably the better word. And some of that has to do with this game. It's just kind of been off and on. And Notre Dame and Navy are set to go there again next year, which it'll be the third time they've played in Ireland, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah. When you look at the game though, and what you jotted down, I'm curious, what was your biggest surprise? Like the biggest difference between what you went in expecting versus what actually happened that you did not consider was a possibility to actually just take place in the Northwestern game.
Yeah, the biggest surprise was Nebraska's strength of its team is its linebackers. It's got two guys at inside linebacker, Luke Reimer and Nick Henrich, who made nearly 100 tackles apiece last year.
Mm,
Had two good outside linebackers, Garrett Nelson and Caleb Tanner, and then it added O'Shawn Mathis from
mm,
TCU, who was two-time All Big 12 pick his last two seasons there. So it was unquestionable to me that that group was going to be the strength of the defense, a defense that had to replace a lot, particularly up front. And that might have had something to do with it, but they did not have a good game. They had
mm,
zero sacks, which Northwestern has maybe the best left tackle in the game if you go by early draft boards, Pierce
mm.
Skoronsky. So that's a piece of it. But the Wildcats honestly handled Nebraska on both sides of the line, which it might explain why that linebacker group looked pretty mediocre. I wouldn't have anticipated that, even though there are questions on Nebraska for both lines. Like seeing Northwestern handle them to the degree that they did was it certainly stood out.
That's interesting. When you look at that part of it, how much of like Casey Thompson's opening game do you just lend itself to the issues with the line? And I mean, new offensive coordinator Mark Whipple still just trying to figure out what he has in Thompson in this group. Like, obviously, a bunch of transfer kids. Like, how much can we pull from this game that you're like, all right, this has to get cleaned up from Casey? Obviously, some bad turnovers there, but I mean, by and large, you watch the game. I thought he was pretty okay. He was fine.
Yeah, I thought he was good through the
Yeah.
first three quarters. He made a play on a 3rd and 9, total backyard football play where he backpedaled and it
Mm,
was a heck of a throw. The two interceptions, they were a little bit bizarre. One
mm-hmm,
throw was a little bit off, seemed like it got on top of the wide receiver a little bit quicker than he expected. It was just weird he didn't get his hands up for it. The second one was just a plain drop,
mm,
went through the guy's hands and ended the game. So, I came out of that thinking, okay, if Casey Thompson's going to play like that for the most part, like that piece of it will be fine for Nebraska. He was under duress. Northwestern got 2 sacks, one of which was a turf monster sack for
mm,
Thompson. And they got some pressure on him, but overall, Nebraska was atrocious in terms
mm.
of pass blocking a year ago. It was better. There's still room for improvement there. The bigger takeaway offensively was there just wasn't a ton of variety in the run game, and the run blocking wasn't noticeably better. And that's going to be a problem if that continues going forward. So Thompson, I think, pretty good. I think they can win some games if he plays that way. The run game, they're not going to win a lot of games unless that improves.
The biggest difference between what the offense ran with Adrian and company last year versus what you saw with Whipple and Casey is what?
This is probably the obvious answer, but like the total lack of a quarterback run game. And there
Mm,
were some plays that Nebraska ran, that were designed as zone reads, or maybe they were just designed as zone handoffs, but they look like a zone read. There
mm,
was a key 3rd down where if Thompson had the option, he chose to give, and if he'd kept, it would have been like a 6-yard gain, but it would have been a vital 3rd down pickup.
mm,
And I think if they're going to run the run game the way that they did, which my understanding, based on comments from Whipple this offseason, was that he kind of came in and implemented his passing scheme, a lot of the run scheme is held over from Frost. And we know a lot of the run scheme involved a lot of option stuff. And Nebraska had good success with it a year ago. So how does that work? I don't think Thompson wants to run a whole lot, but he's going to have to be able to be a functional runner, I think, for this run game to approach its ceiling, whatever that ceiling may be.
It's interesting because like you have like the just scorching weird takes from Pat Narduzzi when Whipple left, and it's like he was upset about like just the lack of emphasis on the run game, and it was this offense that won the ACC, that won double-digit games, and you're like, all right, man, and we're going to see that with Tennessee at Pitt next week, and that's probably the biggest reason I'm feeling okay about that game going next week, where I'm like, okay, Pat Narduzzi, if that's what you want, the reason you beat Tennessee in Tennessee last year was because you won a shootout with Tennessee on the road, with Kenny Pickett just putting on a clinic against that weak secondary and just weak pressure as a whole. In Tennessee last year. It's like, oh, you want to run the ball down? All right, well, let's see what happens when you're down 28-0 or like whatever, because Tennessee they start fast, and we'll see. That's why I'm just so curious about that one. And I'm like, all right, if you want to do that, that's an interesting strategy. But then Whipple comes over, and a lot of folks don't realize like Whipple was a really successful head coach back in the day, the FCS level at UMass, and his offense, like, they should work. So, like, from Nebraska's perspective, like, Whipple makes sense if Casey Thompson is not somebody who wants to run the football a lot, and he doesn't want to be like Adrian Martinez, and he doesn't want to take those hits. He wants to sit in the pocket and run if he has to, like Kenny Pickett ran if he had to. But by and large, we want to pass. Are you concerned that there might be something to this kind of varying style where Scott Frost brought in a great offensive-minded name, but he wants to do these RPO stuff. He wants his quarterbacks to move, and that's kind of where he's at. But Mark Whipple's like, I'm doing my pass stuff, and there's going to be this weird disconnect all season long where it's like, are they doing two competing OC ideologies? Like, this is going to be weird. Are you already starting to worry about that a little bit?
Well, it's been really interesting because at no point through this entire offseason leading up to last week has Frost said, he has flat out said on multiple occasions, this is hard for me. It's hard for him to give up play calling duties. And I mean, that's how he made his name. That's why he's at Nebraska, that UCF offense in that one season in 2017. And, you know, he obviously came from Oregon. So him giving up that piece of it, he's acknowledged it's a challenge. And I think you saw, like, I think his relationship with Whipple is good, and it's really strong. Whipple actually just spoke earlier today at Nebraska post practice and said as much. I mean, what else is he going to say if it's terrible? Yeah, that comes out on a podcast in the postseason later, right?
You say that, though, but Scott Frost has been less than he is not. How can I phrase this? He is not concerned with how some comments he might say after a game or anything be construed by the media. He doesn't seem to care.
No, he does not care, and it continues to bite him. The one you're referring to, and I think there's some truth to this. You know, looking back over the box score and putting together some stuff I'm doing this week, like he said, you got to be creative in this league, which I think is true. And Nebraska, well, it lost its tight end who had 5 catches for 62 yards in the third quarter. That changed things, but you look at the adjustments game, which is a key part of any football game, of course, and I think Northwestern demonstrably won it. In Frost's view, he kind of implied that maybe we didn't switch things up enough offensively as the game went on, which could be true. You know, with the run game piece of it, we know what Frost thinks works. And, you know, the issue with Nebraska for the past 3 seasons, at least, it wasn't so much the case in year one, is that their handoff run game hasn't been strong enough. And if Whipple's gonna, like, I think the Whipple passing piece of this is fine, and that can be good. You're gonna have to be able to run the ball at some point, and if you got a quarterback that doesn't want to do the RPO, the zone read, the option on the edge stuff, fine. Plenty of teams win that way. You got to be able to hand the ball off and get some ground consistently, and they could not do that at all against Northwestern, and have really struggled with that piece of it over the past 3 seasons.
So what do you look for most to see them improve on next week and just getting ready for Oklahoma? What are you most looking for from this bunch after the week 1 loss?
Yeah, so Nebraska opens at home against North Dakota. Not a ranked FCS team, but I think a pretty solid one. Played North Dakota State, South Dakota State, and Southern Illinois teams, all really tough a year ago, all top 15 teams in FCS. And so Nebraska's going to have to go out and earn it. You've got that classic FBS, FCS setup where it's kind of a no-win proposition. If you win by 3 touchdowns, great. That's what you're supposed to do, right? I mean, I don't want to belabor the run game point, but that's top of my list. I think this North Dakota team a year ago was one that gave up less than a sack per game. I'd like to see Nebraska's edge rushers get back on track. I mean, I think their best player, potentially Garrett Nelson, and unquestionably, I think the leader in the heart of the team, plays at that spot. Getting him going could be a key piece of this. Defensively, the tackling really struggled, so you hope that was a first game sort of thing, and that improves a little bit. A year ago, the Huskers tackled really, really well, which was the difference between, giving up 28 to 30 points a game, which they had done in the previous seasons, to all the way down to 23. So those are, I think, the key pieces for me. It's kind of boring, but it's Big Ten football. You got to tackle well. You got to be able to run the ball when you have to.
I like it. Brandon, what can the good folks check out from you and the team at Hail Varsity this week?
Yeah, so we continue to push out a ton of content across our various channels. If you want Nebraska-specific videos, you can check us out on our YouTube page. Always plenty there. I do a weekly podcast, just recorded that earlier this morning, that previews each of these games. It's called the I-80 Preview. You can check for that. And then if you're really interested in Nebraska, we do produce a magazine, a monthly magazine. You can check out the details on that at hailvarsity.com/subscribe.
There you go. Brandon, it was great checking in. Unfortunately, not as great circumstances. But to be fair, this was not a intentional one. Where I reached out to you before the results, so it could have gone either way. Where it was, we could have been a happy pod, a sad pod. But next time it will, fingers crossed, be under better circumstances. Brandon, thank you so much, my friend. You stay safe this week. Have a great week and good luck this weekend.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me.